Welcome to Paradigm Shift. It's a twice annual deep dive into a potentially transformative issue for climate action in our region. I'll admit Doughnut. I'm so happy Doughnut is here. She's such a big part of all we do. Our region being the ancestral home of the Saugeen Ojibway Nation, and Joachim and I would like to start this evening by acknowledging that we are on traditional territory. Joachim?
Yeah, as we gather today on a beautiful spring day in Grey Bruce to think about how we can talk to our neighbors and dive deep about climate change, it's important that we begin by recognizing that wherever we are around here, we are gathered on the territory of Indigenous peoples. In Grey and Bruce, this is the territory of the Untitled Nation, the people of the Three Fires, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, who gathered and governed here since time immemorial, and who are represented today by the Saugeen Ojibway Nation, consisting of communities of Saugeen First Nation and the Chippewas of Neighbours Unceded First Nation and Neyashawiniking. We also recognize these are the lands of the Métis Nation of Ontario. By gathering on these lands, we are all treaty people with all the relations and responsibilities that entail.
Yeah, so I'm a settler here as well. I really appreciate the natural beauty we have. I know we owe a debt of gratitude to our neighbors who are Indigenous for being the traditional keepers of this land. So our group has overspilled its borders of the Grey and Bruce counties into areas of the traditional Saugeen Ojibway Nation, between the Nottawasaga and the Maitland rivers along the shore, and a big swath of land in between those 2 points. We recognize this very clearly. So from tonight onwards, the organizers and the founders of this group will not be using the name Climate Action Team Grey Bruce any longer, and we'll instead be calling it a new name. We've decided it'll be called Climate Forum. So welcome to Climate Forum. And tonight's special for another reason, though. Not only is it a third Thursday talk for our little group, it's also part one of Paradigm Shift, and it's called How to Talk with Neighbors About Climate. So yeah, but we'll have a Q&A with the panelists at the very end of the talk. It's a bit different this episode, this session, this gathering. This is going to happen after you've had a chance to share your own positive anecdotes. I don't know if you read in the waiting room, but start thinking about how maybe once or twice you've made climate relevant to others. And we'll eventually be putting you on the spot. It's a bit more interactive to see if you can share those with us, those tips, and we can all learn together. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Typically, we bounce around in third Thursdays from local communities, Kincardine, Tobermory, Meaford, to get updates on projects. But tonight we have limited ourselves numerically, that is, to four panelists, four excellent panelists who are here to tie everyday priorities to the climate crisis. And even if you don't have a lot of expertise or are hesitant to do so, to talk about it. So here we're going to try and share our tips on how to talk about it. Although this evening is called How to Talk with Neighbors About Climate, at the heart of tonight's program is really a discussion on how to make climate action relevant to people outside our current climate action bubble. Our neighbors can be, as you see, agribusiness. They could be regenerative farmers. Our neighbors can be people living at or below the poverty line. Could be a municipal councillor, could be a corporate CEO. Without further elaboration, we have permission from Dr. Hayho to share a quick clip of the presentation that she gave to the London Environmental Network about a month and a half ago. So I wanted to play it because it sets the tone for tonight, and that's the inspiration for the talk tonight.
So often we think, well, here's my priority list. Number one, I want to survive the pandemic without losing either my sanity or life. I'm worrying about everybody I love. I want to make sure I can feed my family. I'm trying to keep up with my job or even just keep it. I need to pay the bills. I might have to try to plan for the future. And then along comes this sustainability person or this climate scientist, and they're telling me, doing something about climate change is too low down your list. You need to move it up your list. And you feel like, I've already got all of these things at the top of my list. Where am I supposed to put climate action? Well, I'm a climate scientist, and I'm going to say something that may surprise you. I don't think climate action needs to be on any of our priority lists. Yes, you heard that right. I don't think climate action needs to be moved up any of our priority lists. Why not? Well, because I care about climate change because it affects our health. It affects everyone I love. It affects the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, the water we drink. It affects people's jobs and their well-being. It affects the economy and our ability to pay the bills. It affects our future. It affects everything that is already at the top of our priority list today. So if we don't understand the importance and the urgency of climate action, it isn't because we need to rearrange our priorities or change our values. It's because we haven't connected the dots between what we already care about and how climate change affects those things. And if we feel like we have a neighbor or a coworker or a colleague or a family member who doesn't care about it, it isn't that they have the wrong values or they care about the wrong things. They just haven't connected the dots between what they already care about and how climate change is affecting it. Now, this sounds simple, but it's a really important paradigm shift. Because if we assume that people have climate action on the wrong place on their priority list, or they have different values that don't value climate action, often our approach to people can be very judgmental, right? It's like, oh, well, you're not caring enough, so you need to care more. But if we say, no, you already care, you just don't realize it. Here, let's talk about how we're both parents, or we both live in London, or we both work in the same industry, or we both care about the same activities outside. And I'm worried about this because I enjoy skiing, or because I ice fish, or because I have a child with asthma. This is why I care. The conversation goes very differently than if we come at that conversation with an attitude of, well, that person's wrong, or they're not doing or thinking the right things.
Dr. Catherine Hayhoe put that way better than I would ever have done. Of course. I care about climate change because it affects our health, everyone I love, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the future, all these things, trying to connect the dots between climate and those issues. If I were to give this presentation tonight, fortunately we have 4 excellent panelists, but if I were to give it, I would probably try and fumble around and show you this document in integrating health into climate change, and that would be tying it to health for me. Everyone I love, I'd tell you all about the forest school that my kids go to try and connect them to nature. And the food we eat, the air we breathe. I would probably show you what I've learned about the difference between regeneration and sustainability as concepts. And of course, paying people's jobs, well-being, the economy. I would tell you about the amazing Kate Rayworth, who took the planetary boundaries thing in front of you, infographic, and she overlaid a donut on top of it to make it connect to the people and make it human-centered. Well, it'd be terrible if the planet went on living, but we didn't come along for the ride. So, but I am not your panelist. Fortunately, Joachim and I are just your hosts. You're not going to get a 57-page report tonight. Cathy Little has been really gracious in offering to boil down the idea of donut economics and the donut for us all tonight. Cathy is a Grey Highlands councillor, part of the Grey Highlands Economic Development Advisory Group, and she's our first panelist.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Lee, for inviting me to speak tonight. I have to confess, it is a little daunting. Because full disclosure, I am a donut economy enthusiast, not an expert. My credentials are curiosity and I love research. And I just want to say that I'm here representing myself tonight, not Grey Highlands or not Grey Sauble. I sit on the board. I'm just here representing myself. So what does the donut have to do with climate change? Next slide. The answer is it's up to us. So we're going to start with a quick intro into donut economics, why we would use it, and then look at 3 examples of where and how donut economics is being adopted. Donut economics represents a paradigm shift in the way we think about economics in the 21st century. Simply put, the goal is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet. It was developed by the British economist Kate Rayworth in 2012, And since the publication of her book in 2017, doughnut economics has spread around the world and been adopted by neighborhoods, cities, and regions. The doughnut, and Lee showed you this, the doughnut comprises two concentric circles shown here in dark green. The inner circle is the social foundation, or the minimum standards of human well-being. The outer circle represents the ecological ceiling, or the planetary boundaries of Earth's life-supporting systems. And between the two lies the ecologically safe and socially just space in which all humanity has the chance to thrive. So the 12 dimensions of the social foundation are derived from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the dimensions of the ecological ceiling are the 9 planetary boundaries defined by Earth system scientists in 2015. These 21 dimensions include specific indicators, snapshots, and targets. So how are we doing? On a global scale, the doughnut reflects the fact that billions of people around the world still cannot meet their most essential needs, while humanity has already overshot multiple planetary boundaries. This screenshot is from the Interactive University of Leeds website, A Good Life for All Within Planetary Boundaries. And you can compare any nation with any other nation. It's interactive. This screenshot is comparing G20 on the right. So developed countries shoot most planetary boundaries while meeting most basic human needs. And typically the exact opposite is the case for so-called developing countries. Rayworth says that until we can operate within the safe and just space for humanity, we are all developing countries. So this is a really crash course, but I was asked, to put this in. So now that we've looked at the doughnut, let's check out the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. Next slide. Number 1, change the goal. Instead of pursuing ever-increasing GDP, we need to discover how to thrive in balance. Number 2, see the big picture. One that includes not only the power of the market, but the partnership of the state, the core role of the household, and the creativity of the commons. 3, nurture human nature. People are not simply consumers. People are social, interdependent, and depend on the natural world. Get savvy with systems. It's time to abandon the metaphor of the machine and start stewarding the economy as an ever-evolving complex system. Number 5, design to distribute. From thinking growth will even things up, to being distributive by design, recognizing that equality is not inevitable, but a design failure. 6, create to regenerate. From thinking growth will clean up the mess, to circular system thinking, regenerative by design. And 7, be agnostic about growth. Today we have economies that need to grow whether or not they make us thrive, and what we need are economies that make us thrive whether or not they grow. First bullet, why would we use the doughnut? The doughnut model enables us to visualize and to begin to grasp the multiple social and ecological existential challenges we are facing, to stop regarding them in isolation and start understanding them as interconnected. Next one, collaboration. This holistic view of complex challenges demands multiple perspectives. It demands collaboration, where all stakeholders are valued and heard. Next, collaboration nurtures innovation. With new ways of seeing come new ways of being with one another and new ways of acting together. Next, adaptation is one of the beauties of the doughnut. Downscaling is happening, it's working, and knowledge sharing is one of the doughnut economics' basic principles of practice. Context, we approach this work from our own unique perspectives, and we're inspired by past efforts, successes, ongoing initiatives, and we're spurred right now by the very real impacts of COVID-19. And hope. Doughnut economics provides the map and compass. There are cities pioneering the way, and we can start by envisioning the future, not just that we want, but we need. So how do we start downscaling the doughnut? The doughnut economics principles of practice come right out of the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. And the purpose is to ensure the integrity of the ideas that underlie the doughnut model. In April 2020, Amsterdam was the first city to adopt Doughnut economics. Amsterdam joined the Thriving Cities Initiative, which provided a starting point for this kind of holistic thinking. Creating city portraits is a playbook that comes out of the experience of Amsterdam and other pilot cities. The methodology is open to anyone interested in downscaling the Doughnut to their city or their place. Downscaling starts with a big question. How can this place be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? This question transforms into 4 interconnected lenses. Across the top is local, and we have social and ecological, and along the bottom is global, both at the social level and the ecological level, each highlighting a different aspect of what it means to be in a thriving city. In the Amsterdam model, the local social lens question is, what would it mean for the people of Amsterdam to thrive? And who better to ask than the people of Amsterdam themselves? At the core of Amsterdam's community engagement process were 5 community forums, each covering one of the themes here, and a number of subdimensions taken right from the city portrait methodology. So Healthy Amsterdam looks at health, housing, water and food. Connected Amsterdam, connectivity, community, mobility and culture. Empowered Amsterdam embodies peace and justice, social equity, political voice, equality and diversity. And Enabled Amsterdam includes jobs, income, education, and energy. Focusing on Healthy Amsterdam and those dimensions, subdimensions, there are city targets and city snapshots for each. The data are drawn from the City of Amsterdam's existing measures of residents' well-being. The report coming out of the Amsterdam exercise stresses the importance of working collaboratively, involving researchers, city staff, civic organizations, and community networks. The 5th Community Forum was devoted to the local ecological lens and organized around the themes of water, air, and land. Amsterdam was the first city to adopt the Doughnut, but there are others, and the list is growing. Regen Melbourne is the driving force behind the Melbourne Doughnut and is a network of 500 individuals, 40 organizations already in existence, exploring a regenerative future for the city. In October 2020, Regen Melbourne started exploring Doughnut economics model using the city portrait methodology. Towards a Regenerative Melbourne was the report coming out of the exploration of the Doughnut. It just came out last month. I really encourage you to read it. It gives a great overview of the basic Doughnut economics concept, and it has a really detailed how-to guide. It's just very well done. In December 2020, Nanaimo became the first Canadian city to pioneer the Doughnut. Their model builds on over 2 decades of sustainability initiatives. The most recent was called Reimagine Nanaimo and has as its guiding principles acknowledging and addressing climate change and truth and reconciliation. And these both are integrated into their city portrait and Doughnut framework. And this is a draft version of the Doughnut. There's still a work in progress, but we have it here with the permission of the Mayor of Nanaimo, Leonard Krogh. So that was a whirlwind tour, but just before wrapping up, there are so many resources available, and obviously the book is a good place to start. It's very engaging, easy to understand, and I highly recommend it. Kate Rayworth has her own website. There's podcasts and videos, and on there is her 2018 TED Talk, which at 16 minutes is just a great and very passionate introduction to Doughnut economics. A wonderful resource is the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. This came about as a result of the Amsterdam Doughnut exercise. It's open source, Creative Commons. Resources are being added all the time from around the world, tools, images, reports, stories. Fills you with optimism to see what everybody's doing. And I did mention the website for Good Life for All within planetary boundaries, and I do encourage you to explore that. Well, we've come full circle, so to speak. I hope this has been informative and that you're curious to learn more about the Doughnut. If we're to start adding to this blank white space, we can ask ourselves the question, how can Grey Bruce be a home to a thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? Rayworth says it comes down to communication, changing minds one at a time. It seems like it could take forever to change paradigms, she says, but in an individual, it can happen in the blink of an eye. So I want to thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me the opportunity to share with you. Thank you.
And thank you for being such a good sport. I asked Cathy to come because I knew she was interested in it. My first question in the Q&A is going to be all about why this matters to you.
Oh.
So thank you. But for the time being, speaking of people that I asked to come, our next presenter is a farmer and a scientist to combine, and an educator. And he's got a unique take on climate action in our area. And I wanted to introduce him as not only the farmer for Persephone Market Garden and starting up the Grey Bruce Center for Agroecology, and also co-founding Eat Local Grey Bruce. So that would be Thorsten Arnold.
I have 3 slides, and I would like to talk about this slide a little bit. Unfortunately, it's not about Ontario, it's about the prairies in the US, and it basically shows 2 very different landscapes. One landscape which leads towards a dust bowl phenomenon, which we've seen in the 50s already, but the dust bowl has come back in 2019, and since then they're seeing the dust bowl every year, and it becomes increasingly scary to the people. And on the right side, a picture of the same location or an image. I think sometimes art can show more than real pictures can. What we see here is we see root systems. We see very deep root systems. They're typical for the prairies compared to erosion on the left side. We see lots of plants which are typical for the native prairies. On the right side, we don't see any plants. That also means there's no insects, there's no forage for insects, there's no feed for birds. On the right side, we see high value crops, vegetables. On the right side, we see commodity crops, which are sold in huge quantities to very large buyers that then process these into processed food goods. And we see animals grazing on the right side, which is what the prairies has been doing for millennia. We also see clouds. The clouds, they don't substantiate on the left side because the dry soil creates such a heat that the air is rising and is pushing the clouds away. So what I would say, we see 2 different climates in the same location, and it's our human management decisions that can change the climate, whether it is on the right side where our management creates a water cycle that's very active and keeps stuff moist, whereas on the right side we have basically disrupted the water cycle so that an entire region dries out. This has nothing to do with climate change. This is purely our management on our impact on the landscape that can totally redefine the landscape. Now, climate change will happen. The question is, in which of these 2 climates would you like to live? Which of these 2 climates will give you the resilience to deal with global climate change? Global climate change is defined by the IPCC as the global warming driven by greenhouse gases. These 2 images have nothing to do with greenhouse gases. It's entirely our decision making. What do we do with our landscapes? And that's something I find really interesting in the climate discussion. Sometimes we get so focused on greenhouse gases that we forget that the health of our landscape and the ability of our landscape to respond to climate change really has to do with how do we manage our landscape. So quite often, if people think about themselves in the context of climate change, There's a whole lot of things we can do in our daily lives. We can hang clothes to dry, or we can put them in the dryer. That has an impact on greenhouse gases. We can eat a plant-based diet and stop buying feedlot meat. That has an impact on the climate. We can fly less. Flying has a really big climate impact. We can change how we drive a car, or we can buy an electric car. That really has an impact. It's not everything we do has the same impact. Some things are small and some things are big. Something that most people are not aware about is that not only their direct individual behavior has a climate impact. Yes, you drive a car, you can buy maybe a Tesla if you can afford to. And then you can look down on your neighbor who still drives his old pickup truck. Maybe he cannot afford to buy this, but also the money that works for us on the bank or in our pension funds is creating climate impacts. $100,000 in an average portfolio fund has about 4 times the climate emissions than driving a car every year. Average educated Canadian has about $1 million when he retires or when she retires. That's 90, the average portfolio pension plan has about 100 tons of carbon, which is about 40 times as much as driving a car. That's every person who reaches retirement age and had a university degree and a normal corporate job. So what we see here is climate change may not actually be the most relevant. And this really raises for me the question, first, know yourself, know where is your own climate impact. And then the second question, what can you do? It's really difficult to do something about climate change and engage with your community about doing something. It's already like, I shop in Cerda, which is somewhat a privileged place to shop if I don't eat from my own farm. But at Cerda, you can see that the majority of people now have reusable plastic bags and don't use plastic bags. That's awesome. Does it make a dent in the climate problem? I would argue that no. It's something that has a big signaling power, but it has very little impact. What everybody can do is really think about what is my personal leverage in the climate problem. And if you're a teacher and part of a teacher union, I know that in Ontario, the teacher union is planning a class action lawsuit against their own pension plan and force their own pension plan to become more climate friendly. Knowing yourself and your own powers is the basis for engaging in this discussion, and also engaging with your neighbors. If you happen to be privileged enough to buy yourself a Tesla, and you then say, well, you're still driving your old pickup truck, maybe your neighbor will then say, I don't want to talk with this guy anymore. But if you can signal through your own action, I'm doing what I can do in this weird, confusing world where every decision comes at the expense of another decision. Maybe that gives you the mind frame of moving yourself into where you feel comfortable actually just leading as an individual and motivating your neighbor to be like you because you're authentic and you're happy. And I think ultimately what it will lead is that our egos readjust and become, instead of the masters of this pyramid, they basically resettle themselves as an element of your community, as an element of nature, as a part of the social networks that can create change. am really glad that Cathy brings up this really concrete political way of pulling things together. I'm sometimes concerned that the climate change discussion distracts us from landscapes, from biodiversity, or from gender and equity questions. But I think the deeper we get into these questions, we realize it's all part of the same problem. We have to shift our thinking from ego, where we think, oh, I need a 3,500 square foot addition to my home, but because I want to signal to my friends that I'm a climate aware person, I'm going to do it low energy, but with tropical hardwood, because that wood is important for my status. And eventually it moves over and says, oh, actually, I don't need a 3,500 square foot division. I need something where I can meet with my community, with my loved ones. And I kind of reintegrate myself into that community.
So thank you. That's we'll have all sorts of questions on you after the chance to share. That's Thorsten with regeneration of the biosphere and mind. Going from land use over to totally internalizing it would be worrying about your own personal health. And for that, we've asked Witold Kreutzer to speak. Witold said that he wasn't going to use slides, but I wanted to, I'll put a big slide with his friendly face on it at his home because he said you should, if you're gonna put a slide, just put a slide of somebody talking to their neighbor. And this is Witold talking to his neighbor, Barry. Witold, you can veto this. You like that? And you can just talk without sharing your picture if you want, but go ahead.
Well, thank you, Lee. I thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope that some of my words will be meaningful, but all of them are based upon my personal experience with sharing my world with others and them sharing their world with me. Even in this last 2 years, I've been able to share with a great number of people. So I'm going to make an assumption, first of all, because I'm going to personalize it. And by personalizing it, meaning my connection with me and my connection with you. So we all have a purpose. We all strive to do our best when it comes to healing, caring, happiness, friendships, survival, and peace of mind. We all have our own personal evolutionary path, and as important, we have our joint communal evolutionary path. That, as is always the case, life happens and things change. We change, and we're not perfect, and we make mistakes, make unfortunate decisions, and find ways to make our lives more complicated. And we can get sidetracked and hit walls. I would venture to say that I have made more or as many mistakes and errors as anyone who is here tonight. And I'm grateful that I have made them because I've learned more from them, and I feel as grateful for them as I do all the gifts that life has bestowed upon me for 70 years. My belief is that we all want to heal our bodies, our minds, relationships, imperfections, our shortcomings, and become the best person possible, and that we want to be helpful to others. But in regards to others, certain questions come up as far as our relating to them. What changes people's thinking? What causes people to become dedicated to a cause, a thought, an idea, a way of life, etc.? Now, we are born with certain tendencies and attributes, but they evolve and are influenced tremendously and to a great degree, I should say, by our environment. So we have to ask ourselves, what impact does our environment, which means the people that we surround ourselves and the place that we surround ourselves with, what impact does this environment have on our health, thoughts, perceptions, etc.? Where do we look for guidance, insight, wisdom? Do we do it for our parents, teachers, mentors, experts in their fields, or just anyone who we come in contact with? What do we look for in those we trust, emulate, follow, work with, and form strong bonds? Where do we go for the truth, for support, for honesty, and most importantly, for love? In today's complicated and crowded world, does it make sense that anyone would honestly believe that the norms of our modern lifestyle and its pressures on a limited natural kingdom have no impact on someone's or any other living being's health and well-being? Why do we only change our habits when the pain becomes too severe and unbearable? So let's discuss about how we dialogue with neighbors, because that's what Lee asked me to do, because that's what I do. Our neighbors could be our friends next door, someone across the street, someone we come in contact with in the community, or anyone in the world. And how do we talk to people on any important matter that brings us closer to understanding the previous questions? We live and communicate by example and through our life habits, the decisions that we make, our thinking, our relationships, our caring, our emotional investment. I never try to tell anyone else what to do or how to do it unless they are strangling me to death. I feel I demonstrate who and what I am by my actions and my deeds. I don't know if you've heard the old expression, what you do speaks so loud that I cannot hear a word you're saying. So I'll be careful with what I say tonight. Communication and dialogue is a natural journey and expression of one's desire and need to socially be caring and a vehicle for human evolution. Personal and community health and well-being are cornerstones for this healing, growth, and healthy future. If my daily habits and thinking are centered on health and peace of mind, and not just on survival, an atmosphere of selfless service and devotion, both direct and very subtle, imprints itself upon all around me and us. I look to Mother Nature, the caring, nurturing, creative intelligence that constantly speaks to us about health, diversity, and unity. I found, and my experience has been, when I stop talking, I am listening to others, to the genius that is within them. So for me, the best way to communicate with neighbors about anything is first to be present with them. Give them my attention and listen, find out their thoughts, their needs, concerns, what's important to them, and find common ground. That common ground is what we all yearn for in the same way. So we can feel that we are in this together. When it comes to sharing ideas on personal health or community health and well-being, I believe that everything that I do illustrates to everyone around me about my awareness, willingness, and opportunity to accomplish health and well-being in my life and the health and well-being of all that surrounds me. There is no right or wrong path. It is just a personal decision to follow a pattern, a set of habits, a fulfillment of personal preferences before they become absolute needs, and then sharing these with anyone interested. There is no scorecard, no testing, no grading, just living and supporting. But when things get critical, all of a sudden, we start to look for the scorecard. When it comes to climate action, for me, it is a personal decision, a personal responsibility that has led me to become aware that thinking and deeds that improve the health and vitality of Mother Nature, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the earth we stand on, the soil we grow in, the flora and the fauna, microorganisms of innumerable species, all result in my regeneration and revitalization, and that of you, our neighbors, and the entire human community. I love to imitate nature, listen to natural vibrations, and learn to be a vehicle of this natural intelligence. People really get it. They can intuitively feel and see when our vehicle and intention includes their happiness and health in the message. The specifics of the message is not as important as the outcome of the message. And there are many amongst us, some of which you're hearing tonight and have heard before, have valuable talents and expertise about the various pathways to resolving our climate change issues. It was brought to my attention that during recent gatherings of those involved in climate action, we include all parts of our community in our sharing, communication, and support relationships. Personally, I have invited elected officials to my outdoor porch for friendly neighbor-to-neighbor contact and chats that reinforce the tone. We are all in this together. And how can I help you in your work and home that will make my home healthier and more injected with a peace of mind that can improve all our health and well-being? The good part about it, many of my invitations have been accepted. And so people know where I live, and the councillors in Chatsworth and the mayor especially feel free to visit me. I make every attempt to lead, communicate, or express myself by the example that my personal habits and deeds express. What I'm saying is secondary, and I really do apologize for speaking so long tonight. I know everything that I do has an impact on others. The more easily I make myself available to others in support of what they share is important to their health and well-being, makes our relationship more accepting and easier to commit to. We must determine for ourselves what are the best ways or methods or language of communicating. We all are different. Whatever the answer to this question is, it probably involves a sharing of common goals, methods, and an evolutionary path that encourages and promotes our mutual health and well-being, the cornerstone of healthy evolution of the entire natural kingdom, which happens to include me, you, and all our neighbors. I think I said enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Vitold. That's really wise words. Now, our final presenter, who has agreed to talk generally about the Dr. Catherine Hayhoe clip that you mentioned and in activism in general, is Victoria Cerda. And she's also part of the Doughnut Alliance. And she's also doing she's a leader at the climate reality training that Al Gore does.
Thanks, Lee. I'm really grateful to the other presenters for their good overviews from their own angles about climate action. To tell you a little bit more about myself, other than these photos, I'm generally a very happy person that really likes to talk about positive solutions and build on strengths with people. So I'll be talking about why people want to listen to you, building a relationship, about finding commonalities, celebrating, and assuming that people are good. So just to give you a slight overview, and Ani Bajo, everyone, and it's so nice to see so many lovely people here that I've known for a very long time. I grew up in Owen Sound, and I've been doing climate action and global warming presentations and things like that since the 80s in our region. So it's amazing to see so many people that are picking up those bundles, like they're taking action in their own lives. So I'm a settler ally, and most of what I do these days is raising Indigenous voices about climate change, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. We're here to talk about how to be able to talk with our neighbors. And I think one of the things that sometimes people forget to consider is whether people are going to receive the message that you want to give them. In studies that they've done in social studies, they found that if you are talking to someone and about a third of whether they actually will listen to you or not is whether they believe that you are respectful, that you're credible, that you have integrity, and that you're able to connect with them. So when you're doing, if I'm giving a presentation, I normally would talk a little bit about, like I'd show those pictures of, me doing things that are actions, like tree planting. And there's my grandson, and he was at one of the Fridays for Future Known Sound. And, so that people can feel some connection with me if I'm talking about this. And it's really important to always establish that heartfelt connection in order to then build a relationship out of that. So because people don't normally change overnight, they change in small ways, and they change in ways that they're comfortable with. I have known since the 80s that we have a climate emergency. I know many of you have been working on this for a long time as well. It's not going to be suddenly that people wake up the next day and then go, oh, I'm going to do something. For most people, like there is an epiphany moment quite often, but not always. Sometimes it's just slow change over time. And we need to do what we can to encourage them to make those changes that need to be done. So this positive relationship we build with our neighbors, we have to use their language. We have to be careful of words that may trigger them. So you need to get to know them and understand what things they care about. Just as an example, my brother did a very, very well-known documentary, The Game Changers. He's also from Moan Sound, of course. And in that documentary, he didn't use the word climate change once, but there was a lot of advocacy in that film about eating more plant-based diets, which in turn will affect a lot of people toward having a healthier diet, both for them and for the planet. So those types of things, sometimes we don't have to use those words that might trigger someone into a negative reaction. So you use the language that they will accept and that they'll be happy to talk to. So for instance, like I was involved in politics a lot when I lived in Port Elgin. I'm now in Wyerton, but I ran against Ben Lobb, who is the Conservative MP there. And in our area, we don't always think that people are going to want to talk to us about green and environmental stuff, especially in parties where it's not very prominent in what they're doing. But I established a really just good, positive relationship with Ben, and we used to have a lot of conversations about what was going on in the region. And then, even years later, he would come up to me and see me at an event. He'd like beeline for me, and he'd talk to me about all of the green initiatives that he knew about, or that he helped to promote, or all the good things he was doing, so that I was his cheerleader and I would celebrate those good things. And I became that person for him. And that kind of thing is really important if you want to be able to change politicians. I was a municipal councilor. I know that. I really wish I'd had more people that came on board with me and said, you're doing great things, Victoria, please, how can I support you to do those good things in our community? So using that positive way of doing things is really good. So celebrating, more of a soft sell in our area works. Talk about economics. The health frame is really big for people. Connecting air pollution and people's health, goes over really well when you're talking about that. Sometimes justice is another thing that people start understanding. I work in Indigenous communities because there's a real environmental justice problem that we need to make sure that we're raising their voices, that people understand the environmental racism that they're being affected by. But that's not necessarily what I'm going to talk to my neighbors about, because that may not be something that they understand or that they already are talking about. So we talk about the good things, model what was good, talk to them about what's good, celebrate those things, and be really careful about nitpicking or judging. One of the biggest criticisms I've seen in my 30 years of advocacy work is that quite often people tear each other down by nitpicking all the small things about the differences with other people. And you get bogged down instead of moving forward with some solution that's good enough. It ends up the nitpicking brings us all down. So let's move towards positive solutions and, talk about things that we can all agree on and that we can do. We have to be careful not to say things so that people get upset, because what will happen is if they do that, they entrench. So they actually will get more strong in their own opinion, and they'll stop listening, and they won't, the next time they hear about something similar, say about climate action, like recycling or something else, then they won't want to do that because they've already had that feeling where they put up a barrier and they don't want to talk about that anymore. So we have to make sure that we don't get people to that point of putting up a barrier where then it slows them down in their own journey towards more action. And the last point that major point that I like to make is that I always assume that people are good and they care about where they live and that they care about other people. So come from that starting place so that it is a conversation between people that care. And when that positive, like strength-based approach happens, we can let people have their own passion and their own solution, and they can talk to you about the things that matter to them. And you can celebrate what they're doing and cheer them on. And it can be a gentle kind of conversation. Like my good friend, Ningwakwe George, she does a lot of research at Saugeen First Nation, and she's an elder there. And most of her work is around mental health strategies. And so you can imagine that is a difficult topic to talk about, right? But what she does is when she just starts a conversation with people, and then she has gentle probing questions where she just keeps talking and she keeps being interested and she keeps being there for people. And if our neighbors think that we're there for them and that we care about them and we think they're good people and they want to do good things and we celebrate the good, then of course they're going to want to do more in whatever way in their own lives in a way that matters to them. And that's what we need, is we need everyone all working towards a common goal that we are going to solve this climate emergency that many of us understand that we have, but not everyone understands or puts in the same way in their lives. But there's so many ways that we can all work together in order to be able to make it so that it's part of every decision that people are making throughout their lives, as Catherine Hayhoe is saying in her talk. And she's another Canadian, right? Although she lives in Texas. She's actually the opposite of me. I'm married to a Texan who lives in Canada now. But we need to all work together and see what we can do about caring about our world a little bit more through everything that we're doing all the time. And that, I think, is really what's going to help both us and our neighbors collectively really want to do something about acting on climate change. Thanks, everyone. Looking forward to the discussions.
Nice. Boy, everybody stayed to 10 minutes. That's really fantastic. Thank you. I realize this is a total crash course. It seems like it's all over the place, but a paradigm shift in our area in Grey Bruce can't happen. Well, it has to start with little crash courses like this. So we'd be remiss if we can't resist the opportunity not to actually talk to our neighbors. So this is the part where in a few minutes you'll be able to unmute and share. And we've asked you a couple of times maybe in the waiting room and informally, just to think of something that has worked when you're talking to someone, how you've connected with them, like Victoria says, like at a starting point. And we want to learn from all of us. So it could be chatting with an elected official. Vitold says he regularly has his councillors on his porch. Could be with a coworker. It could be, like Thorsten says, whether at Zehrs or the reusable bags at the checkout. Could be at a farm gate. Like everyone is basically our neighbor. It's one of those words that's really quite general that people like me love. If it's a positive story though, with a takeaway, we want to hear about it. When this pop-up box happens, you'll have an option to select one of the 4 breakout rooms. The panelist will be in that room with you, but their job is just to listen. Thank you. So your question, as you see in front of you on the screen, is when talking to neighbors, what has worked?
People were more responsible for themselves and their families. I'm paraphrasing, that's not exactly what everybody said, but And we also talked about reducing fear and barriers when you're talking with people, especially with youth, talking more about abundance and that, you know, everyone being able to have enough. And the last thing that we were talking about was the importance of the government coming on board. Oh, actually, we also talked about needing to be able to talk about greed and stuff with people, having too much stuff, and more about how to be able to get youth involved and engaged in this. So hopefully with my group, that was a good representation of kind of generally what we were talking about.
Nice. Be told, what did you hear in yours?
So unless we came in contact with our neighbors and knew our neighbors, and it's not the easiest thing to go and speak to people about issues. And so a few people did share their personal experiences with certain things they are doing, whether it's an electric car, solar panels, garden, or ways of that they felt climate change could be easily presented. So it's the type of thing is that we're not salespeople to try to sell climate action, but if we are approached, we feel confident enough that we could explain our the issues we have and inform that. Now, one thing that was mentioned was to how the use of a bicycle or walking daily or on a regular basis and meeting up with your neighbors on a regular basis, even at these times, how much that could mean to building a strong communication and friendships at the same time. So
some ideas that stuck out is someone said how she used to walk up to truck drivers and basically tell them to turn off their cars, and just learned it's not going anywhere. And I just have to take a new approach that's a bit more just humble and humorous, which I find really, really lovely. And another aspect, somebody asked, well, how do you go and how can we talk to beef farmers on Bruce County, and just how difficult their situation is because they are tied up in a very, in an economic framework that they haven't built themselves, but they've kind of, like the framework has enveloped them and now they're stuck in that envelope. And also just the need to develop compassion and see people where they're at. Just to answer that question, no, I don't really know how to talk about climate change in these contexts either. I think there's a lot of pent-up frustration with the dominant narrative. So people feel really defensive for any reasons.
Thanks for sharing. And Cathy, are you?
I think the common theme was just when we're talking to our neighbors, it's really important to remember how we treat other people. And so we had one instance of a very quick conversation in a store, but approaching a situation with respect and friendliness, and it was well received, and so it carried on from there. Another situation that started in the same way and developed over a period of 3 years into a friendship, and with some positive changes moving through that. So I think the two things that I've heard already that sort of are common themes is sort of meeting people where they are and having patience. If it's someone you know, then you can build that connection over time. Obviously, if it's just someone you're meeting, a stranger that you're meeting, maybe you want to go out on a limb and take that opportunity just to make a friendly comment and see where it goes. But yeah, I think it boils down just to the way the way that you see other people and how you approach them and how you talk to them, the way you treat them. And
those are wise words. That's great. But I did want to show you some people did find the sticky notes. So there were some interesting ones here. It looks like someone started on the right-hand side, started a conversation about a composting toilet. That's a pretty funny icebreaker. And I would love to learn more. Reducing fear and barriers. That's exactly what Cathy, at least Cathy was saying, if not a couple presenters. Homeschooling. Yeah.
I have a comment, not a question. I think it's really important to start conversations, you know, and not be, especially with strangers as well, you know, and not be too kind of guarded about just striking up a conversation, because without doing that, how do you introduce anything? You know, I think we shouldn't be nervous about it either.
Nice. Did a panelist want to talk about nerves, maybe?
I can take a gander at that one. And we need to just throw them out there. You know, like I've had conversations with people about this since the 80s, and I talked with a conservative MP once, and he kind of quietly went to me and he said, you know, and this was in 2007, I'm starting a secret caucus in my party where we're going to talk about climate change, and then when we finally get a better government in, we're going to make it like an all-party caucus, and then we're going to have real climate action. I was like, yay! I would never imagine that, right? Like sometimes you have to just throw out something and think that somebody might be doing good, and you'll never know, you know, what kind of good conversation will come out of that.
Yeah.
And not so much a question, but I have a great idea I heard about a fellow who, he and his wife, they put up a poster at a farmer's market that says climate picnic, and they have a little table and they put it out and they just like, people will come over and or lots of people won't because they don't want to talk about it, but some people will, and it's just like an invitation in public. And I thought it was such a fantastic idea.
It's very exciting to start something. A lot of people are motivated. Sibel, I'll let you.
I think we need another session about how to talk to your financial advisor. Because I mean, it's been pretty clear that the fact that we want growth, I don't want growth. It's such a conflict. And, you know, yeah, it's just, that's my big hook. And I was happy to see the donut bottle. It's just complex. That's the problem. It's so complex. But it finally grasps the fact that we have known forever that it's not possible.
Yeah, I just want to maybe again get back to this question of nervousness and expertise. I think that's one of the biggest barriers today in the environmental movement, that people don't feel qualified. I've recently realized that it's impossible to be an expert about climate change, just the same way that we cannot be an expert about children or women or relationship, just because each child is different, each relationship is different, all of these are very complex systems, and an expert is somebody who understands a system. Like, I understand a car, I'm a car expert. I'm a software expert, I know this software. That's what we envision, and we want to be this expert before we start to talk about climate. Climate is vastly more complex than all of our brains together. So we all don't know anything about the climate. Even the most educated people at the IPCC really don't know anything. And I think that's very empowering for me to realize we cannot be experts of complex systems. We can be experts of climate models because they're technical systems that we can understand. So by letting go of this idea of expertise, we can start to ask questions and re-envision ourselves in a new in a donut economic in the end, and ask ourselves, how do we redefine our longings, our desires, our self-presentation in a way that we actually become attractive, and people who are at ease, at peace with their surrounding, they're attractive regardless of how they look. And so being that person is much more important if you talk about climate change than feeling an expert of the subject matter. So I find that an interesting shift of my thinking. And I'm working on being happy where I live with my surroundings, my family, and then I can still pick fights with anybody outside without taking it too serious and too deep.
Thanks for sharing. Somebody on the virtual whiteboard mentioned that food and local food is such an icebreaker. Does anyone want to speak to that from the four panelists about?
Simona Freibergova, who is the leader and network of the community gardens in Grey Bruce, at the few that I've been helping her with, half the people who are putting plots in the community gardens are people who have their own gardens already. But they're being part of the community garden because they want to share. They want to be with people. That's probably partially also because of the pandemic. But in the last two that I went to, you know, we talked about, well, eating more plant-based food, making sure that everything is organic, that nothing has pesticide use. And they all said, well, you know, I think we're all becoming climate activists. I came across someone who I admired very much. They are an intellectual giant in my eyes. And I know that if I talk to them about climate change, I know that there's going to be a stone wall. So I took another role play. I role played with him. I asked him for his help. If you were me, how would you lower your carbon footprint on the planet? Can you help me? It's amazing. He came up with about 8 or 9 ideas, but climate change is totally a hoax to him. So after a few discussions, he basically said, this was unfair of you to make me give you the answers. And now I am, you know, looking at doing those things, but he still doesn't believe in climate change, but he is doing. So even in the community gardens, we talk about things like sequestration, which was never talked about 20, 30 years ago. You just knew how to maintain health of a soil. So people are learning the vernacular, learning things from each other as neighbors. So I think that's the positive side, people getting together as much as you can and doing things even on a small scale.
I think it's sometimes very strange to talk with farmers about specifics. Are you organically certified, or are you plant-based? Just because I think what's much more important is, do you care? What do you care about? Do you care about birds on your farm? Do you have owls on your farm? I was a couple of years ago doing a consulting job and talked with a butcher who is not organic because he's grazing his cattle on his neighbors, on his he's grazing the cash crops after they are mowed down, and that's a very ecological way to return nutrients to the field. But it's not organic because the neighbor is also spraying, so all his animals are not organic. So he gets really frustrated if he hears the word organic. And so he was asking me, what would you do? And I said, well, maybe just talk about the swallows, the barn swallows that are abundant at your place. And a few days later, he put a video up, and a number of birds on his farm are amazing. So just finding the right framing, and I think care is what do you care about in nature? What is it? How do you care about nature? Is a much better framing than are you meat, like are you vegan? Like there's many ways how you can integrate animals into your system that make a lot of sense if you care. If you don't care, or if you just care about your money, then you get into these very industrialized systems that are degrading our planet.
Nice. Okay, well, that's a great way to conclude. As I teased before, we've changed our name to Climate Forum, and that's the tagline is "Learning Together for Climate Action," formerly known as Cat Grey Goose. We had some reasons why we did it. We wanted to be more inclusive, more relevant. So we are now, in name at least, more inclusive and more relevant, we believe, because it's reflective of what we have. As if we don't have our subcommittees and projects anymore, we're a ground floor for climate action regionally in a forum. We had some objectives. We wanted to inspire new climate action teams where there are none. So there's tons of municipalities in our region and 2 First Nations as well. And so we want to inspire cats where there are none. We want to host these talks, and we want to gain the critical mass in our region to affect change before we see the most severe effects of climate change firsthand. We have third Thursdays ongoing all the way through 2020, 2021, 2022. They're discussions designed to be relevant to all of our communities here. So sharing and learning with our community, a Q&A, reaching those who care, and acting as, like I said before, a check-in for the entire region, from Meaford to Saugeen Shores to Kincardine to Tobermory and everywhere in between. But today and maybe in November, we'll have a deep dive, like I said, with some audience participation. This has been more of a transformative issue, or it could be a transformative issue for our region, and how to talk about it. It's all emanating from Resilience, the documentary that inspired the climate action team in the first place. And I want to thank you for attending. And we're thinking the working title for the next one is to talk about reducing as opposed to reuse and recycling. So the actual reduce, the first R.
Well, I think you covered it all. Thanks, everybody. There was a lot of ideas came together, and so I mean, talk about paradigm shift. That in itself is a paradigm shift to talk about, and an experiment. And I think it was a good start today. So thanks, everybody, and see you in the 3rd Thursday in June.